G'day everybody. I put a photo up on my page the other day, and it was a image to do with the pedophilia that happened on board the Endeavour under the leadership of Captain Cook, and it was some reference evidence in relation to that, written evidence in relation to that. There were some very interesting responses, some very strong responses, both through private message and on Twitter and on Facebook. So I just want to respond to a few of those messages. In particular, this response is for anybody who has felt the need to point out that pedophilia happened amongst Māori too, as their primary response to this evidence. I've already made a few of these points in written form, but I feel like I need to make them again. Some people have alleged that this is a case of character assassination, either of Cook or his supporters, Cook's supporters, or the supporters of the impending 2019 sesquicentennial 250-year anniversary event, which is a year-long multi-million-dollar event remembering his landfall here. So, yeah, apparently it's character assassination. Let's talk about character assassination for a little bit. First of all, I want to say that it is super concerning to me that anyone, when they are presented with a case of pedophilia, has a default mode of defending it and deflecting and equating the blame back on Māori. If we are having a discussion about pedophilia in general, the phenomena in general, then maybe. But we're not having that conversation. We're actually having a specific conversation about a specific case of that happening along these journeys by specific people, Cook and his crew. So what you're actually doing in that sense is that you're trying to use this tactic to deflect discussions about what actually happened on board. And you can just as easily do that today. And think about how that might look if you did try to do that today. Oh, well, Your Honour, this man isn't guilty because Māori do it too. If you're trying to establish some kind of equivalency, then let's do that properly. I want you to talk about a specific tipuna. You just take a moment and choose a specific tipuna Māori to talk about in that way. Once you've chosen that tipuna, you show me where we have ever suggested to hold a multi-million-dollar year-long event around that tipuna. You can't, because we don't ever get that kind of money to celebrate any of our tipuna or any of our stuff for us. We just don't get profiled that way. You know how we do get profiled? We get profiled on Police 10/7, on Crime Watch, we get profiled on Coast Watch, on the news, we get profiled as criminals, we get profiled as bad parents, we get profiled as underachievers, we get profiled as a general drain on society. Māori are up to 6 times more likely to be apprehended, prosecuted and convicted and jailed than non-Māori who come into police, thanks to that profile. And that profile began with Cook and the way that he would call us savages. He literally named Niue Savage Island. Institutional racism is rife in this country, and that's an established fact. It's not an opinion, it's a fact. But even for those Māori who are guilty when they come in front of the justice system, you have a look at their multi-generational background where they have been told over and over again that they are dumb, that they're savages, that they're less likely to succeed, and they're told this at every conceivable opportunity. The history that they're taught in school, the media that surrounds them from the moment they're born, the way that they're treated by public servants as they grow up, all of these things repeat and reiterate the same message that they are in all likelihood guilty of something. and all of their sins are likely to be capitalized, and all of their wins are likely to be minimized. And that is how it is in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And at the same time, those kids get to sit in class and learn about a history that promotes the beneficial act of these white imperialists. History that ignores the harm that they did, especially when that harm was visited upon us Indigenous peoples. That's their favourite kind of harm to ignore. These kids get to see their Pākehā counterparts treated very differently. They know that they get to walk through the supermarket without being hassled by staff, that they can drive around without being stopped, that they aren't going to see their relations, their kind, in the homeless camps, or standing outside the front of the courthouse, or talking out a window to a police officer. No, they get to make their way through life with considerably less barriers and considerably less debilitating messages. Now you have a look at Dr. Ngātata Love. Guilty of fraud, yep, to the tune of $1.5 million and sentenced to prison at the age of 70. And you compare that to Ed Sullivan, head of South Canterbury Finance, guilty of defrauding over $2 billion, slap on the wrist. The deprivation that Māori experience is never taken into consideration during sentencing, and any suggestion of that is always soundly rejected in the courtroom. But if you're the son of a wealthy white winemaker and you've knocked out a police officer, you can absolutely have that taken into consideration, because your white background hasn't equipped you for jail, so you can just get a slap on the wrist. You're a Māori father who's trying to feed his whānau and you take 10 trout, jail. But you break into houses along with your mates and you steal $80,000 worth of stuff because you're bored, oh well, there's extenuating circumstances there. Again, your background hasn't equipped you for jail. There's so much for you to lose there. So best you do some home detention or a suspended sentence instead, right? You see, Cook's was just the earliest account of us as savages, of this negative profiling, of this character assassination. But just like everything else that he paved the way for, he also paved the way for this character assassination that's still continuing today. The way that we're portrayed in history and in the media as lazy and brutish and promiscuous, that is directly related to how our ancestors have been treated by this government, and that's directly related to how they've wound up treating themselves and how they've wound up treating each other. And it's directly related to the reality of a man sitting in jail right now because he tried to feed his whānau from his own waterways. And it's directly related to any number of Māori babies who are going to be removed from whānau and removed from te ao Māori and removed from their birthright to be raised as Māori in their own land. You want to talk character assassination? How about you go have a word to all of those who are suggesting that we provide yet another platform where white sins are going to be overlooked because apparently the few on the beach that were killed, well, hey, that's collateral damage. They were warlike people anyway. Māori did it too. Those unarmed that were murdered for their waka, well, hey, collateral damage. Can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs, and we wanted that waka to have a close look at it. The youth that were kidnapped, dragged out of the water while they were trying to swim for their lives, and we don't know why they were kidnapped or what was done to them. We just don't know that. But hey, all of this sits along with all of the other crimes that happened around the Pacific as a part of the backdrop to the real event, the inception of our great nation, the discovery of Terra Nullius, the noble bringing of civilization to the savage crowds. What about the fact that these men knowingly passed syphilis and gonorrhea onto our people, and that alone caused massive devastation amongst these populations? How about you go have a word about the character assassination that's happened to us every single day since then, that is epitomised by this event and the way that it's being funded and represented and promoted. And that brings me to my next point. They invaded us. Cook knew he had syphilis. He knew his crew had syphilis and gonorrhea. He also knew that he was completely failing to stop them from spreading it at every opportunity. Was that enough for him to turn the boat around? No. Ask yourself why. Because ultimately, we didn't matter. Now you ask yourself why you're also willing to stay quiet about the fact that he's a murderer and that he's getting given a platform. You ask yourself why you're more worried about the fact that people are talking about the pedophilia than the pedophilia itself. And why it's so easy for you to turn around and say, oh, well, Māori did it too. Why are you so quiet about the fact that this event is being forced upon the descendants of the victims of that time and those acts? And you want to cry character assassination instead of looking at the facts of what was actually done. You don't get to bring up, well, Māori did it too, when we're discussing an invasion upon our territories whereby men knowingly infected young girls with devastating diseases. Māori did not do that. We did not get on our waka and sail over to Britain and get off and take their young women and infect them with sexual diseases that whole population had never come into contact with before. We did not do that. It's not the same thing. But what's most awful out of all of this is that any of you would want to use this as yet another opportunity to join the social chorus of 250 years and attack Māori and point the finger at us rather than consider the facts. And here's the facts. He was a murderer. He was a thief. He was a kidnapper. And he did that all the way around the Pacific. He brought syphilis and gonorrhea to our peoples, and in many cases that happened through child sex. And the final fact is that this event is being forced on us, and while that's happening, we're also being told to shut up if we don't like it, because that just means we don't know what's good for us. That's bullshit, pure and simple. If people are supporting this event, that's what they're supporting. You might want to focus more on what that means for our people rather than reflecting on how that looks for the supporters or worrying about how that makes other people look. Because the painting over and the false legitimization of those facts is also their active choice. And if that truth hurts, well, guess what? The last 250 years hurts me.